Bitcoin on Wednesday hit a new all-time high of more than 66,000
Now
US
it's starting
dollars.
to actually gain some
If
traction.
you're stupid enough to buy it, you'll pay the price for it one day.
It has quintupled in value over the last year.
Elon Musk makes one of his riskiest bets ever.
Money is just a number in a database.
We're talking about a decentralized
The supply of dollars can never be sufficient to satisfy the debts that it creates.
Bitcoin has officially hit a new all-time high. Welcome to the All-Time High podcast, a crypto podcast. And my name is David Vader. Here's my co-host, Swerty.
How is everyone doing out there? So exciting time. Bitcoin has officially hit the new all-time high, and it coincided with the release of the first podcast we recorded last week, actually. It was only a couple of hours after that.
Yeah, perfect timing. And I think it was 6 hours after our podcast finished recording, of course, because we had to work out some intros and the uploading of the first episode. We only released it maybe 2 days later. That is going to shorten a little bit for our listeners. We're going to try and record these and get it out to you as soon as possible so you get the latest up-to-date news. But, you know, I take that as a omen for the success of this podcast, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Yeah. New all-time high, cracking 65K US. Huge numbers there.
What a great looking chart too. Just over the last few weeks and months, we saw quite a retrace. There's been a lot of turmoil because of obviously COVID, and Bitcoin, as always, is quite a tumultuous crypto. All crypto are, but when we look at the larger movements, it's really good to see that all-time high. And if we look at some of the other big hedge funds around, including PIMCO, is a $2.2 trillion asset manager. That's 2.2 with a big T.
Yeah.
And when you take us through that one.
That's crazy, man. Like this is more evidence of institutional money flooding into this market. They came out and announced, the chief investment officer announced that they've got 2.2 trillion that's exposed to crypto-linked securities. So that could be the new ETFs that are launching now. It doesn't say there that they've directly purchased any Bitcoin, but they've got exposure to it. And that's more evidence of the fact that Bitcoin is here to stay and Bitcoin is here to rise. These large funds are not buying because it's a hedge against inflation, which it is. They're not buying because it's the new gold, which it is. They're buying because they see the rapid growth opportunity of this asset. And
absolutely.
And that's the thing to keep in mind here.
At least in the short term, we're going to see a lot of large institutions jumping in to profit off of these larger movements as more people are exposed to the crypto space. I mean, we hit the entire market capitalization of crypto hit like 2.6 trillion, coincidentally with the all-time high.
That's right.
A lot of money, but it's still quite small compared to the greater currency markets in international currency markets, which move like, what is it, $5 trillion a day?
Yeah, that's right. And it's got a ways to go, I suppose. I mentioned before that the reason they're buying it is because it's growing, but it is a hedge against inflation. And billionaire Carl Icahn came out. I can't. He came out and he, I guess, said something that's fairly obvious to all of us in this space. But again, he's an ingrained billionaire of the previous generation, and he's coming out and saying Bitcoin could be an inflation hedge if the Fed's money printing continues. Well, thanks, Captain Obvious, but still good to hear it,
Yeah, I think when billionaires and large hedge funds are jumping in on opportunities like this, again, at least in the short term, it's a good green flag. I think when you look at what's happening essentially with the Fed printing large amounts of money, we saw trillion, like we said last week, there's like 40% of US money ever printed was in the last couple of years. That's ridiculous. And there's this way which that leads to, which is essentially inflation. And depending on how much money the Fed continues to print, we could see inflation basically outpassing interest rates and what people can get on their savings, which means if you don't have your money in a hedge against that inflation, you'll be losing money by sitting on it, either in the bank or if you've just got fiat cash.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what large institutions do to expose themselves. They're not going all in. They're putting a certain percentage of their asset allocation into cryptos. And I'd assume most would be Bitcoin, but of course, Ether is quite a large crypto now, with it also hitting some really high numbers over this week. And it looks very strong, especially with NFTs being the largest growing space currently in the world, I believe. And yeah.
It's this icon fella famously talking about how he doesn't understand Bitcoin and all of these a lot of doubt, I guess, he had at the start, and now he's starting to acknowledge things. And of course that's due to this huge rise in the price, no doubt.
I was thinking, I do wonder when billionaires say that they don't understand Bitcoin, is it they don't understand the concept of how it works? Because that's fairly rudimentary and simple. And I think if you explain that to someone, how it works as it's a great currency. It's got every box is ticked as far as what you want out of a transactable currency like gold. Or is it he feels there's that undercurrent of it could still be regulated or, I guess, affected by larger market movements? And we saw China recently banning it, but it's like that hilarious little graph which shows every time the price of Bitcoin rises.
Yeah, that's a funny graph.
Yeah, I often wonder what they mean when they say they don't understand it.
Yeah, true. I mean, only they can tell us, but from what I gather, I think, you and I have a deeper fundamental understanding of what Bitcoin is because we've, surrounded ourselves and have delved deep into this subject matter, whereas a lot of people haven't. Billionaires like Carl Icahn, have spent their lives building their portfolios and their companies, their investment companies, and they know a load about how to choose a company, an investment vehicle. But that doesn't necessarily mean they understand the fundamentals behind how the dollar works and how money works. Either way, the charts look amazing.
Did you see that article about the $8,200 flash crash where I wasn't sure if it was multiple or one person's, but basically the client's trading algorithm had a bug which allowed purchase of $8,200 of Bitcoin.
That's right. It was trending on Twitter.
Seconds.
The price smashed down to 8,000, which is ridiculous. I just love the idea of some poor trader. He set up his trading bot maybe to do some dollar cost averaging. He wants to buy 30 million in Bitcoin. And he's like, you know what? I want to buy maybe 1 million per day over the next month. And he sets up his little bot and he has it all together, but he's put like a decimal or a comma in the wrong place. And the bot then just buys the entire market book that's available on Binance in one go. And on the flip side of that, imagine that as a joke, you've put in an order for 1 Bitcoin at 9,000, thinking, haha, just in case it crashes. And then suddenly you immediately buy 1 whole Bitcoin at $9,000. The price immediately jumps back up to 60 plus, and you've made yourself, 600x return almost instantly.
It's a hilarious chain of events for that to happen. I guess like a lot of people turn around and say, well, see, that's a serious problem. But, we're ironing these things out. But kudos to that trader for picking that little bargain up.
Yeah, I mean, someone had to sell it to him if they're buying it up. Of course, this was only one exchange, and it's not really volatility in the Bitcoin space, so to speak. There's been a lot of good news that has kept Bitcoin propped up. Looking at another article here about MasterCard now coming out and saying they're integrating Bitcoin payments or crypto payments, I should say, through their new partner Bakkt. Now, are you familiar with Bakkt at all? What Bakkt is?
Yeah, so it sounds like a really good little system, basically that custodial wallet system where they allow you to basically buy and sell digital assets. It could even be like gift cards or NFTs or whatever you might actually have. And I think this is going to be really used by a lot of gamers to start with, younger gamer generations, people who want to buy in-game purchases and or redeem points for purchases and stuff that they might actually have.
Yeah, that's right. Instead of getting pocket money from their parents in the form of cash, just send me a backed payment, or send me a payment through Cash App, which is of course run by Square, Jack Dorsey's company, which we'll get to a little later. But that's a huge alignment, and it shows that these big companies like MasterCard, Visa, they know what's coming, and they're fearful for their current business model. They have to innovate.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess also being exchanged, it's on the New York Stock Exchange, backed. They're seeing a lot of price rises in the price of their stock. That's going to, of course, attract investors and people wanting to get behind companies like this, especially with the futures that we saw last week, basically exposing more people to that as an option. And this is just the start. And MasterCard's a big name in this space. Once companies like this start, it forces the hand of other companies to decide, well, actually, how are we going to get involved in this as well?
Yeah.
Because every day there's new things popping up, not just in, I guess, the credit spaces or banking spaces, but also in creative spaces for NFTs and what have you. And even Tesla, there was a rumor, I believe, that Tesla was talking about maybe they could bring back payments in cryptos.
Yeah, it is. I did see that one. It's a bit of a rumor at this stage, I suppose. But back in June, Elon said, as if Bitcoin's network hash rate is powered at least by half renewable energy, they'll consider it. And so I guess that's a good indication that things would resume. I don't think that news alone is market moving, but it's certainly, part of a bigger trend of companies adopting this technology or getting left behind. Also in that article, though, I did read down the bottom that Elon Musk was asked about whether he holds any Shiba Inu coin, and or if he does, how much. And he responded a single word, none. Which I'm sure tanked that shit coin.
Totally,
for a minute at least. He said he only owns Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Doge. That's it.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on actually the? See, it's quite often people criticize Bitcoin for being a huge energy user. It's contributing to greenhouse gases or carbon emissions. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, a lot of people are attempting to make it more green. Since a lot of mining has moved out of China, we might see more regulations on the way it's mined. But as a whole, do you see that space changing towards a more neutral future, carbon neutral future?
I think it's a bit of a can of worms, and I don't know enough about it to have a solid opinion. But from my understanding, Bitcoin mining is a big driver of energy innovation, and it is very much driven by green powers. You can make the mistake of simply looking at Bitcoin network power that's required to power the network and say, oh, it's bigger than countries, it's bigger than entire nations across the globe. But of course, comparing it to a country may not be doing it justice. It's comparing apples with oranges. It might be kind
of like, why wouldn't you compare it to one of the other things that we use regularly, which also uses a lot of carbon? For example, refrigeration across the world for supermarkets, or one of those random things that, well, do you actually know how much energy skyscrapers use around the world, or how much
or even
is,
or somewhat closer to home, the environmental impacts of extracting gold constantly and the pollution that's caused by that. Maybe Bitcoin is a better solution. At the end of the day, the beautiful thing about this world is that the market decides, and things will become clearer. Of course,
so will efficiency. Efficiency will improve as we move towards it. It's like all things. Early days, it takes technology a lot of time to improve. There's a lot of money spent, a lot of problems to get out of the way. And of course, if you look at early days of transport, we were literally just burning coal. Yeah. And since then, we now have a lot of alternatives. So to criticize, I guess it's almost like criticizing the horse as it pulls the cart. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah. That horse is taking carrots out of the mouths of humans, and therefore it's wasting food supply. No, you got to look at the bigger picture, and I think an innovation like this is well worth it, and it's also driving that innovation. But there's a lot of changes going on in the world, and that Bitcoin is part of that revolution. But I did see an article that I guess is a little far away from Bitcoin in some senses, but it does impact money and the way that our society consumes. I saw an article here about how the Australian product rental market is catching up with the rest of the world. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the product rental market, it's essentially this idea that instead of buying your clothes or handbags or sunglasses or mobile phones, instead you rent them, and you rent them for a fee. And that way you can return them and get the newest thing once you're sick of that thing. I think that shift is a very interesting one to keep an eye on, because it really affects how consumers relate to money. It's no longer about me saving up money so that I can buy a car or buy something. Why don't I just get a weekly or a monthly salary and fund my lifestyle into perpetuity? Because I know that the government's giving me free money anyway. So it's really a fundamental shift, I suppose, in the way that consumers think. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that relates to Bitcoin? Do you think that change in consumer mindset relates to Bitcoin at all?
Yeah, I think inherently what is driving this is it's a two-part thing where you've got less money versus expenses in general. People are starting to feel the squeeze of natural inflation and rising living costs and keeping up with the Joneses. I think more and more people want the latest, the best. Products for kind of the last 10, 15 years. I mean, radio rentals, as an example, has been around for a while, but more and more, I think the generation, kind of our generation really, people born from the 80s onwards, want the newest and the best. We don't necessarily always have that expendable income to go out and buy a new MacBook or a new iPhone or a new car as regularly as we want. But the regularity of renting allows us to have that as an option. The transience of that means people are going to look for opportunities to essentially have more money. And if we want these things now, then this is going to, things like renting become obviously a much choice. It does relate to Bitcoin in that if people see Bitcoin as a store of value and a hedge against inflation, not yet. I don't think a lot of young people are seeing this now, but over the next decade, they will more and more. And this is just another example of how money and spending, the economy, are actually changing. People aren't the same as they used to be with their economic choices or their spending behaviors. And the world is going to react to that. You summarized it beautifully before. The market will decide. And so we're going to see a lot of changes in people's spending habits and the way that we approach money and the way we value money. And I mean, obviously, if money, fiat currency, is losing its value to inflation, I mean, you can't just be printing money and think that that's okay. France did that. When was that? Back in the 1690s or 1760s or something like this. And they tanked their... Yeah. They tanked it.
And you know what happened? And then within 85 years, they changed currency and done it again. We don't learn.
We don't learn. We don't learn. I mean, look at there's an article that I was reading before. It's New South Wales families to receive $250 vouchers for homeschooling during COVID. And I think that's a great thing. New South Wales got dragged through, along with Victoria, some really tough restrictions, some of the toughest in the world, if not the toughest. I think Victoria was close to some of the toughest restrictions. And we're seeing all the, was it Save Australia, deploy troops to Australia? I think it's slightly tongue-in-cheek from the US kind of social media and people over there who are involved in news and some of the more satire news sites, but they're saying we should save Australia from the tyrannical government. They are literally giving us money. And the families of people in lockdown New South Wales and Victoria, $250 vouchers to some is going to be an insult. The amount of money that they've potentially lost, the amount of income, how hard it's been through lockdowns. But that said, the ethics aside, with whether or not that's a nice thing to do, economically, it's an example of printing money that has to come from somewhere. Now, that particular amount of money, that particular example, that may not affect inflation or drive inflation, but Australia has been printing money and giving money out.
Yep. It's just more
US
evidence
has
of this push towards increasing the amount of money in the system. And that is as a result of, stagnant growth that needs to be propped. How do you make people spend more? How do you make people spend more money in the economy? Keep house prices up, keep the demand for new cars up. Well, give them a bit of money. And that can be through really low interest rates and make debt really cheap. Or straight up, give them $250 vouchers and as a thank you for homeschooling their own kids during lockdown. It's absolutely crazy, man. It's a funny world. And it leads to inflation, maybe even hyperinflation. We saw a tweet from Jack Dorsey.
The old CEO of Twitter and Square. And
Square, of course.
Smart
he
man.
owns this guy owns Square. He has access to incredible amounts of data sets with respect to consumer purchases. And he's calling out hyperinflation. He says, hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's happening. Now, this is from a guy who has access to this data set. He's not just looking at CPI or some other manipulated government metric. He's looking at the raw data and he's saying this. And that, to me, is a big bullish flag for Bitcoin.
Yeah, of course, government CPIs and the way the government uses their information and data often comes from experts. It comes from census details and information that they slowly get. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they have immediate direct access to huge, vast amounts of data. We're talking billions of people using these services, these platforms, every single day. And they have access to really, really amazing computer software and programs, and which can mine through all of this big data. They use algorithms to extrapolate information and then apply it to economic theories.
Yep.
Hyperinflation. Look, Jack Dorsey isn't an expert on economics, but as we said, he has a lot of access to the information that he can then use to compare to what leads to hyperinflation. What actually occurs? What are the steps to hyperinflation? Basically, the first one is print lots of money.
And keep printing money,
Yeah, and you lower the value of that money. And some people don't understand it until you give them a simple example. I don't want to go too simple, but let's go really simple. If I make bolognese or pasta and I give you a serve and you eat that pasta, you're happy. If I go, do you want another serve? You might. If I go, do you want another serve? You'll go, no, I'm good. And I go, I've got 2 more serves. And then I suddenly have 3 more serves. Tomorrow I do the same thing. You don't want any more pasta. That's what happens when we print too much money.
There we go. That's the perfect analogy for hyperinflation coming from the all-time high crypto podcast. That's a good spot to wrap it up. Thanks for joining, Swarty, and it's David Vader signing off.
Have a good one. That was good.